Recording. I think you all got a notification there. Thank you all so much for participating today. It really means a lot to us that you take the time to so that we can learn from one another. That's the most important thing I think that we do in terms of the PD that we offer in the IDC. My name is Chris Daniel. I'm Faculty Professional Development Manager. With us presenting today is Dr. Karina Christopher. She's Interim Department Chair and Associate Professor of Food Nutrition in the Department of Applied Human Sciences. Is that right? That's not super new, but I can't keep track of all these names and things. So it's not just this department, it's everything, class. But I guess that's a sign of how long I've been here. But in any event, thank you all so much. And I've known Dr. Christopher some time. She's been very active and interested in improving online teaching and learning, especially I think she's brought a lot of that understanding she's cultivated to her face-to-face classes even. So with that, Dr. Christopher, thank you so much for your time today, and take it away.
Thank you, Chris. And I really appreciate everybody who's joined us today. I know it's hard as you get closer to the end of the semester to find just a moment, but I do want to keep this fairly open today so that I can share some ideas with you, but we can also sort of create some ideas together as we talk about creating meaningful real world assignments. And so, you know, one of the things that's really important to me in my online classes and in my in-person classes is I want my students to see how this content that I'm delivering to them is something that they will use in the future, so that it's very meaningful for them and so that they can sort of apply it to their own lives and maybe even their own future career that they could potentially have. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to describe this experiential learning. So that's sort of the umbrella of those meaningful experiences is experiential learning. And I'm going to give you some different software that I have used that you could use for an in-person or an online class. You could use, I've done it in both. I've done them for online classes and I've done them for in-person classes. And then I'm going to give you some strategies for how do you think about putting these into your own courses. So maybe tweaking an activity or an assignment that you currently have, or maybe adding something in to provide more of these sort of hands-on real world experiences that are very meaningful for the students that you have. So I just want to do a brief overview first of experiential learning in case you are new to it or you just need a refresher. It is an engaged learning process. So this is primarily where students learn by doing, and not only just doing, but also reflecting. And it doesn't require, you know, an assignment where they reflect in the background, but it would be that as they're doing their activity, they're sort of reflecting on what their experience is. And it also stimulates academic inquiry by promoting some interdisciplinary engagement. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart, just having students not just silo themselves into their profession and their context, so that they can be more culturally competent or aware and stronger leaders. And so there's sort of categories of what would be considered experiential, and it could include all of these or just some of these. It could be reflection, critical analysis, and synthesis. It could allow for students to take initiative and make decisions. So you maybe give them a project that has some broad parameters, but they are sort of really leading with how they interpret those parameters and then implement that assignment or that activity. It gives students opportunities to engage intellectually and creatively, maybe even sometimes emotionally, and I'll give you some examples of that, and socially. And then it's a designed learning experience that really includes the opportunities for them to sort of learn from like those interactions, those natural consequences that sort of happen, or if they do make a mistake, how do they learn from it? How do they react from it? For example, if they do, you know, maybe a discussion and they get a response that they didn't expect, maybe a student says, well, that sort of hurts my feelings, or that's sort of not what I understand you to say, then that's a great way for them to grow and to learn and develop. So these are just some examples that are in some of the literature that you might find. I'm going to give you some more specifics within these. So, any sort of hands-on learning where it's like an experiment in a lab, and that could be a set lab, or it could be, like in our department, we have apparel design classes. It could be in a textile lab, right, where they're working with materials in there. It can be internships and practicums. It can be field exercises. Maybe you, for example, have them do a walkability audit where they have to choose the location and they have to identify certain things along that walkability audit. So it doesn't have to be a very formal field exercise. It can be more broad. It can be study abroad experiences where they're interacting with different cultures. It could be research or even studio performances. So there's lots of things that could fall even as subcategories underneath these. So experiential learning has been around for a very long time. It sort of was initiated when Kolb sort of introduced his cycle of learning. Some of you may or may not have heard of this, that really reflects on content. So students have the content as sort of the base of everything. And then you have the knowledge. So we give the students the knowledge, right? We're teaching them the content in class, and they take all of that knowledge, and in the background of their mind, they're sort of using that content that they're getting from you, basing it then upon what they already know. What have they learned in other classes? What have they learned from experience? And so as you're teaching them, they're sort of combining these things together to sort of understand what you're talking about. And so sometimes it's hard to know the context that the student is coming from, but that's what makes experiential learning so interesting, is that you give them then that activity or that real world setting, and you can see what their context is. You can see where they're coming from, what knowledge they're drawing into that class, and where they're sort of have had experiences or not had experiences. And then you have the reflection stage where because they've interacted with the content, because they have built upon their previous learning and previous experience, they now have this new knowledge that they can apply and they can sort of move forward. And so the advantages of this, of creating these real world experiences, is it helps them as they're interacting with the content that you've delivered in this really sort of real world type of activity. They create more deep and lasting connections to the course material. It's not just regurgitating what they heard in a quiz or doing an assignment where they just rewrite out something from the textbook. It is them interacting with the content and sort of making those connections that maybe they can't make just by reading the textbook. It also encourages them to apply that knowledge. So again, they've heard it, they've learned it, they've read it in the book, they've listened to the slides, they've listened to the video, but now they can also apply that and they can do and act upon it. Heightens the impact of emotion. So sometimes if we get students sort of emotionally involved, then they will increase their learning. It promotes learning through critical reflection, sometimes ironically, their own frustrations as they do the assignment and their own sort of unexpected things that they run into helps them reflect on how well they know the content and how well they're able to sort of interact with that content. And a lot of times they could learn life skills that can be used over and over again, depending on the assignment and the activity. And they're using multiple senses, they're not just reading and regurgitating, but they might be critically writing. They might be getting emotionally involved. They may be using other types of lenses and senses to sort of interact with that material. Now, there are disadvantages, and I can't ignore these. It is more of a challenge as a faculty member to create these, because in a way, you can't just write a quick quiz and give it to them and just see how did they do, right? You have to be able to think of an activity or an assignment or an experience that applies what you are teaching, and then develop and sort of create this activity and assignment that you give to the student with some guidance, but you don't want to hold their hand because they need to interact with that real world experience and reflect on their interaction in that space. So you have to be patient with the student, and you have to have guidance, but not hand-holding guidance. And it's difficult to grade. I mean, you could have a rubric, but your rubric can't be so specific that there's only one way that the student can interact with that environment. It would have to be, you know, maybe the student gives a completely different perspective on something that, you know, if they're out in the real world doing something, or interviewing people, or doing discussion boards, it might be something that is, you're just looking for their reflection in their content. It can be difficult for some students that are having a difficult time staying on task and with time management. It can be difficult for students who have been so used to those sort of formative assessments where I just learn the material and I take a test, or I answer some questions on homework, for them to have more of a sort of broadened, I need to be really creative. Sometimes that's sort of a struggle for them. And we do know that not all students learn the same way, and they don't all learn really well with that hand-on activity. So, you know, some students really prefer a really straight, cut and dry rubric, and exactly how do you want me to answer? I don't want gray areas. I want black and white. What do you want from me? And so sometimes they'll struggle with these types of activities that are more broad and require more interaction with their environment. Some can be costly, although the ones that I am going to give you today are all, like, the software is all free. So the students don't have to pay for any of these things. But, you know, if you're doing an internship, or if they're doing a practicum and they have to travel or they have to live somewhere else, then that can be a costly experience. But the software that I'm covering today is all free. So that wouldn't be anything that the students would have to pay out of pocket for. And then the learning outcomes, as you create these, sometimes those will vary based on the assignment. And so you may be using the software multiple times in the class, but you may change what you want to get out of that. Especially as students get more and more comfortable with the types of software. You know, that first assignment, they might be using the software and they have lots of questions and they're really frustrated and they're really anxious about it. But after they do it and they interact, you know, the next one becomes much better, and the learning outcomes can change. You know, maybe the learning outcomes at the beginning are just skill-based, and moving on, they're more reflective-based. So thinking about all this, you want to create these real world activities in your course. So the first thing you have to think about as a faculty and as a teacher is, what am I doing in this class? What content is in this class that the student will then do in the real world? Whether that be, you know, if it's a gen ed class, you know, even skills in the gen ed class can be used in the real world, right? So what are you doing that somebody can do in the real world? And it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be a major class or supporting class. What are they going to do? How can they use this? And also think about, does that element also require the student to empathize with somebody else? And this gets to that sort of emotional engagement with the activity. So for example, are they going to have to be able to communicate well with a diverse audience? Are they going to have to educate a diverse audience? And in order to sort of be in the real world, most people aren't in a vacuum. They're not in a silo, and they have to be able to work with others, whether that be others in their career, others that they're interacting with in their community. So not only what are they going to use in the real world, but what are they going to use in the real world? And it's going to require other people to work in the real world. So then the other question is, what's your primary delivery? So again, if you're 100% online, or if you're 100% face-to-face, do you need to modify what activity you're doing based on that? Now the software I'm going to show you, it can be either. So I made it so that it's both, and I'll give you examples of how you can use it both ways. But if you're 100% online, maybe you want something more specific so that the students interact with other peers in their class. Or maybe if you're 100% in person, maybe you want something where the students bring in something else and present to the class. So it just depends on what your kind of interaction is going to be. So you have to think about that first. And I tell you that this is sometimes the most challenging thing, right? Because you have to sit and think, okay, what could they do with this content in the real world? And how do I mimic that as best as I can in the, semester that I have, or the, term that I'm doing this class? Like, what can they do realistically that's not going to be too much of a challenge for them to actually implement that? So then you've got, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I know what they're going to do in the real world. Then you have to think about the skill. So is this a 200 level class or a 400 level class? Do the students have high levels of reading skills and critical thinking skills? Do they have to be able to have really high technical computer skills? Do they need to be really good, have really strong interpersonal skills? So what skills do they have? And if you've ever done a tilt training, this sort of leans back to tilt, where you have to really think about, I'm going to give them this real world activity, but to be successful, what do they need to have as a baseline skill to be able to do this effectively? Do I need to have some sort of community member or stakeholder involved? So do I need to have like a health department that's agreeing to assist? Do I need to have, maybe another resource on campus, like it can be a campus community member like the Knoll Studio, or, what sort of other person or support do I need to have for this student in order to be able to do that activity? And you may not, it depends on what that activity is. What is the time commitment? So can this activity be completed by the student in a couple of hours? Or is it an assignment that's going to take a week or an entire semester? So how long is it going to take to complete the activity? And is it going to be something that they have to build upon maybe every week if that's necessary? And then once you have all that narrowed down, then you think about the software. What software best reflects and gets me sort of the closest I can get to this real world experience? Or is there even software that they can use once they become a professional? So I want them to interact with it in a safer environment before they get to their job and their boss says, hey, go use this, and they have to use it confidently. So thinking about which is sort of that best method. So let's start with some software. So I've done a session on Flipgrid before, so I don't want to tell you how to use Flipgrid. I'll show you some examples, but Flipgrid is an online discussion forum, basically. It is free, and students can access it at EKU, and they can log in with their EKU email. They can do the Microsoft login and log in. It can be made private, and I usually do make it private because I don't want just anybody on Flipgrid to be able to enter the class and listen to the discussion board. But what's really great about Flipgrid is that it really mimics the student's ability to talk to other people about some pretty serious topics in a very respectful way. So one of the things that I've gotten feedback on from students when I use Flipgrid is that in some classes, when they do discussions, they're typing something in Blackboard and then somebody else is typing a response, and it's very obscure. You don't see who's responding. You just see a name that pops up, and you can't connect that name to who that person is. But in the real world, we're getting, we do a lot of things digitally, but in the real world, you're going to be face to face with somebody, or you're going to be seeing somebody's sort of face on Zoom, and you need to be able to communicate with them in a very effective way, but also a very professional, respectful way. And to me, Flipgrid mimics that as best as I can, especially in a 100% online class. So I love it for 100% online. I also love it for 100% in person, because we all have those in-person classes where we try to do a discussion and like 2 or 3 people talk and everybody else is sort of radio silent. And so you can sort of introduce discussions in the in-person class and then assign the Flipgrid so that you get everybody's perspective. Now I'm gonna get off this real quick and show you the Flipgrid example that I have. So this was in a class we were talking about nutrition, kind of a basic nutrition class, but we wanted to talk about adolescent bariatric surgery. And so in Flipgrid, you can embed videos. So I embedded a video. It was in the textbook, but they also, I wanted them to read this video where they followed some adolescents that were going to have the surgery. All right. So the students had to watch the video, read the information in the book, and then answer the question, do you think it is beneficial for adolescents to undergo bariatric surgery? And so any type of sensitive topic that you might have where you really want the students to practice providing very respectful, empathizing responses, Flipgrid is really good for that, okay? And I'll give you an example. So this student recorded,
I do think it's beneficial for
her response. Okay. She has her response, and I require all students have to make a response, and then all students have to respond to 2 peers. That way they have to listen to a video and give meaningful feedback on that video. And what's really nice, and students in a lot of my evaluations, they love being able to see somebody. Now, if you have a student, I don't require them, they can cover their face up. I don't require them to show their face, but for the most part, my students are happy to show their face. They like for other people to sort of see and interact with them. But then they can respond to what that previous student said. And what's nice again about this is all of these students are very diverse. They all come from very different backgrounds. They all have a different context that they're starting out with on this topic. So they maybe have somebody in their family that has experienced this. Maybe they have experienced it themselves. Maybe it's the first time they've interacted with it and they didn't even know this was possible. So they can go in and make these comments. And when I evaluate, I'm evaluating more on, was this an appropriate response? Were they being respectful? Were they interacting in a sort of mature, empathizing manner? Not so much on, and yeah, I do make sure that they say it correctly, but not so much on, did they respond with all the right answers, but did they respond in an appropriate interprofessional way, okay? And that's what's so great about Flipgrid. And it's really interesting as the instructor to listen to their comments, because you learn too, like where are people taking in this information and what are they sort of learning from the process? And it's a great way to get a lot of meaningful interactions, because it's a little bit more safe space than in a classroom where you see that person sitting there and they're nervous to talk in front of a bigger class. So Flipgrid is so much fun for students. And I'll leave room for questions at the end if you guys have specific questions about any of these. So Canva is another free platform. You can pay for Canva and get a little bit more templates and stickers and fun things, but it is free in sort of its basic format. And you can create interactive presentations. If you have a part of the class where maybe the student in the future is going to be doing social media, marketing, creating educational handouts or flyers, maybe some sort of business type of element to that, Canva is really, really good for doing that. And so I've used it in several different classes. I've used it for an in-person class and an online class. Trying to get my cursor to move so I can click on it. So these are just some examples of what Canva can create. So here's a educational handout. Some of these I use for personal use, but, and this I think is important too, I also use them as examples for students. So a lot of times if I assign something either from Canva or even from Flipgrid, I will give them an example. A lot of times it's an example that I have created, but other times if I have a student in a previous semester who just knocks it out of the park, they have done a really good job of making something for me or posting something, I will ask them, hey, you did really well. If I take your name off of this, can I use it as an example in the future? And so I think having a good example that students can see is sometimes helpful, especially for those who are sort of hesitant about this whole idea of I'm creating it myself and there's not these strong black and white parameters. Having an example for them is helpful to kind of get their juices flowing. But I use Canva a lot for handouts. So if I want the students to be very concise and give a story or do an educational session, or if I want them to create some sort of social marketing, then I will use Canva for that. There are templates that are in Canva that you can use. You can also do presentations, just like with Facebook, Facebook, with PowerPoint, you can create presentations and slides. What's really kind of neat about it is that with Canva, you have a lot of templates that you can use because it's stored in an online place. It's not taking up any space on their computer, and then they can share those slides with you as the faculty member. So there's lots of things that you can do with Canva. And so if in the real world, they're doing flyers, they're doing educational handouts, they're doing presentations, and they need a little bit more template friendly, moving things around, Canva can be a really good sort of place to go with that, to try to create something that they might interact with. So a Google site, also free if you have a Google account, and Google sites are essentially websites. Sort of like the old wiki. If you've ever done a wiki in a class, that's sort of like what a Google site is. You can create and build a website. And so if you have a student who in the real world is going to do a website, then this is a great place to start playing around with something like that. It's a place where you can also have digital data organization. And what I mean by this is, maybe you have a program where students have to maybe study for like an exit exam, or they have to study for an entrance exam into something else, or maybe their credentials require an exam. You can create a Google site with like a study guide almost, essentially. And I make my students do that, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So I call it their pocket brain, that they have everything that they need in a very concise place to help them study, because to be a dietitian, they have to pass an RD exam. And so that's essentially what this is it's their own personal website of all the most important content that they need. And this is a huge challenge. The first couple of times I assigned it, students would just copy and paste all of their notes. But that's not the purpose, right? The purpose is to be able to take the content and can make it concise and clear so that they can go back to the content and use it in a very real manner. So you can create other pages in the Google site. So for example, if I go to one of her other pages, she has very concise information. so that if she's in the real world, she's in the hospital, she's in the skilled nursing facility, she can pull up that information. It's on at her fingertips. It's right there. So this is just one format. You can also do other formats. This is what it looks like if you're still editing. You have the ability to change your pages. You have all of your pull down menus in here. So if you have an activity in which you really need that student to think very concisely, perhaps, or to create some sort of page by page project, then a Google site is really beneficial for that. I'm thinking of like another class where maybe you're having them learn the digestive system and you want them to be able to concisely tell you what each organ of the digestive system is doing. You could have a page where they have that sort of concise information. Another one is the Picto chart. So a student told me about this one because I had assigned Canva, and the student said, "Hey, Dr. Christopher, I've never used Canva, but I have used Picto chart. Can I use it?" And I said, "I don't know what that is, but if it gets you the same final outcome of the assignment, then sure." And I do that a lot sometimes for students. If they have a preference, but they're still going to give me the same outcome, sometimes I'll let them use a different software. And I also, for any sort of accommodations, I will sometimes let them do one of these different ones. So for example, with Flipgrid, I have had a student who had an extreme stutter and she did not feel comfortable recording something on Flipgrid. And that's fine. She was more comfortable recording something in YouTube and sending it to me, which was really important for her because she's like, I'll actually have to use this a lot. I will have to create a lot of YouTube videos for my career choice. And I want to be able to practice this and be able to, record a video and know I might have to make edits to it. And so that's what she does, is she does a YouTube video instead of Flipgrid and sends it to me. But a lot of these you can interchange based on the student's needs and their skill level, because some of them do require a little bit more skill level than others. So with Picto chart, it's another one that's similar to Canva in that you can take templates down and you can make visuals. You can do social media, you can do marketing, you can do professional presentations. You can put in data and it'll give you survey results and sort of neat little grids and graphs and pie charts that are really interactive. You can do infographics, educational handouts. You can do timelines. So if you have maybe a history class or a class where you want to show changes over time, you can create a timeline and have the student pick in which dates and what information is important. So you can do those types of things. And then you can collaborate, you can share, which you can do for a lot of these. Canva, you can share with other people if it's a group, or they can share with you as a faculty member. But if you're going to have, like this is an example, my students created a handout for the food bank. And the food bank wanted some just basic information that they could hand out when a participant came in to get their bag of food. They wanted to be able to give them a little handout to take with them. And so my students were tasked with talking to the food bank director and asking what would be beneficial, what kind of information do you think your participants might need? So it required them to speak professionally and ask appropriate questions to the director of the food bank to figure out what would be the most beneficial to those participants. And then they had to create a handout for that specific topic. So this was one of them that they did in Picto chart, using a template, providing all of the information. And of course, the rubric was just, I had to assess whether the information was accurate because each student had a different topic that they did. So not everybody had the same topic, and they had to provide references for their information. So it's again, you can use it very similar to Canva, but it does have a little bit different features depending on what your sort of ultimate goal is. And then the last one I want to show you is Adobe Spark. And this is not an all-inclusive example list. This is a list to hopefully give you some ideas and strategies, because I'm sure that the other people on campus are using lots of other ones, and I've used other ones as well, but these are some that I've used quite frequently. Adobe Spark, you can use it for a lot of different things, but creating visual stories and presentations is one of the things I like to do. So if in the real world, your student might be doing a blog, maybe they're doing a vlog, they're doing a video blog type of thing, or even social marketing. Maybe they are creating a website, maybe they are trying to do like sports marketing, or even an itinerary. And so this is an assignment that I created in a global hospitality class, where these people could be tour guides in the future. And with everything moving digital, I wanted the students to practice basically selling a tour using an online format, okay? And so they were given the task, it was like a case study, that they were the tour guide, and there was a family that was wanting to have a big itinerary for a trip somewhere. The student could pick where, as long as it met the needs of everybody in the family. So it had 2 children and 2 adults. And it, that was the only parameters I had, was that you have 4 people in your family and they all have to be happy because they're going on vacation, and we cannot have a family upset on vacation. So it was a very broad, again, it gives the students this broad guidance, but they have to be empathetic to everybody in the family. And so with Adobe Spark, the students essentially created a virtual itinerary. So this student, the Faulkner family was the name of the family. I made it up. It was not a real family. But this student decided that this family was going to go to Louisville. All right. And so part of the itinerary, of course, had to have a place to stay, places to eat, and then activities that the whole family could enjoy. And it's kind of a challenge if you think about it. And those of you who have families, you're like, where can I go that everybody's happy? So with Adobe Spark, and it's so cool how interactive, like how pretty you can get Adobe Spark to be. But the students then pick exactly what they want in here. So I had no parameters that they had to have a video. I didn't have any parameters that they had to have 5 pictures or 6 pictures. It was really their creativity and their perception of what they felt like the family would need. Now, of course, we had talked about interprofessional communication. We had talked about meeting the needs of diverse people. So they had that background, they had that context to build from. So this student put this video to highlight why this family should go to Louisville, like what's so great about Louisville. Then she had day 1. So she picked the hotel, gave a brief description of that hotel and why it would be good for the family. Then she had that the first thing they were going to go see was the Louisville Slugger Museum. Again, a little bit of a description of that. One of the places to eat, and this might be convincing all of you to go to Louisville, perhaps, but one of the places to eat and why, again, why this is something that the family should go to. And, the big thing here I wanted to get, and the students got it without me telling them, was when you do an itinerary, it needs to be an experience. You need to experience the culture to sustain the culture. So that was something embedded underneath all of this. Day 2, it had another place to eat. Then it had an activity, another place to sort of eat. And of course, bourbon has to be in there because it is Louisville and it is Kentucky. So this student understood the assignment, right? What's the culture of Kentucky and how can this family experience that culture? And then day 3, the final day of this trip, they go to the Kentucky Derby Museum and have just a brief, what were the links, where can the people go to find out more information. So that's what you're gonna do. This is an example of something that you can do in Adobe Spark. And it can feel like a website, it can feel like a social marketing tool. There's lots of things that you can sort of do with Adobe Spark as well. So I wanted to make sure to leave space in case anybody wanted to go back and see any of these again, and I can interact with them a little bit more. Here's some of the references. I will say, as sort of a final thought, that it can be a little daunting as a faculty member to do a software that you've never done before. And because you're like, oh, I have to learn something new. I've not used this before. But I'll tell you that that's sort of where the students are the first time they see it too, right? So a couple strategies that I have for that is, first, there's lots of YouTube videos that are tutorials on how to use them. And I have watched some, but I didn't have to watch a million, because usually these software that I've shown you today are very user friendly. Once you kind of click around, it's basically tells you what to do. It tells you what that button is and why you should push that button or not push that button. So don't be intimidated by a new software, because these are all very user friendly. Two, it's okay if it does not go well the first time. It's totally okay. And I have had that happen. I have given somebody, the students, an activity, I've posted what they should do, and they have lots of questions and I don't have lots of answers. And so I tell the students sometimes, that's okay, let's figure this out together. And it is okay to still be learning while they're learning. And I have done that, because even sometimes I'll have students that do something completely different than I thought could happen in that software. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? Show me. Like, show me how you interacted with that and show me where you clicked. And it's totally okay. The students they've never been condescending to me. Maybe they feel like I'm, oh, that poor old lady, she's figuring out software. But they've never been sort of that disrespectful sort of behavior. I think too, think about asking other people who have done it. If you know the faculty, like, I'm happy to help anybody. I know there's lots of other faculty on campus that use some of these software, and they've used it for different activities. And I know Chris has used it, and some of the others, like, I'm sure that they would be more than happy to sort of guide you to some examples of what other faculty have done. But start with something that, again, start with that activity, that one thing that you think would really give that student the opportunity to do this in the real world, and just build from there. You'll sort of build your confidence as you interact, and you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. Maybe I'll try something else. This was kind of fun. The students are interacting in a different way with the content than I'm sort of used to. So, again, don't be too afraid. Again, don't be afraid to make the mistakes, and to learn as you go. That's, in my experience, totally normal. And I didn't feel less as a professor for making mistakes and learning while they were learning. So then saying all that, I'll leave it open for any questions that anybody might have for me.
Hey, Karina.
Hey.
Which software would you recommend for interns? Currently, I run the internship program, and they submit their hours every week, but I'd like to have them do a little video outline, maybe a 1 minute or 2 minute verbal description. They'd write down what they do, and they said, I did this week, I did this, and I got this many hours, and they send it in. It's an online class, and they can be anywhere in the country, but I'd like to do kind of the video log. I was thinking maybe Flipgrid. Would you recommend that?
I guess what I love about the idea of Flipgrid is that, especially if you had other interns that could see what everybody else is doing, because then because they're not all getting the same experience in an internship. They're all getting can go on and hear what other people are doing that yet, so they can really get a good opportunity of hearing what everybody's sort of doing. And even if the outcome was different, maybe they both had a very similar circumstance, but how it might have been handled by the preceptor was different, or how maybe the site reacted to that was different. And so they can kind of compare, like maybe which one worked better, or is one better than the other? Maybe it's not. So Flipgrid would be really good for that. You can, with like Adobe Spark, even they can record videos there too. It's not as good if you want other people to watch it. If just you are going to watch it, you could do a Spark. But if you want the other interns to watch or to hear what they might be doing, I think Flipgrid is really good for that.
Thank you.
I have a question, Karina. I'm similar to Jim where I do internships, but I have a lot of them. So what would be the most, I think Flipgrid would be awesome, but I do a discussion board similar to Dr. Larkin where they put something they learned for the week, but there's 75 of them. Does it take a lot more time? Is it, what does that look like? Am I going to be watching videos for hours at a time? Is it reasonable, I guess, do you think, or what product do you think might be best for larger cohorts of students?
So you can set the length of time in Flipgrid. You can set however long you want their video to be. In my experience, I've never had anybody do more than 5 minutes. And I would say on average, they'll be done in less than 2 minutes. And I guess it depends on how quickly you read their responses, which one would take less time. Because you can sort of be, if you have a rubric or you're using something to evaluate, you can be listening and finding those points on your rubric at the same time if you use something like Flipgrid. So if you have 75, you could be looking at maybe 150 minutes total, depending on how long. But if they're doing like weekly reflections, those might be shorter than if it was like a monthly reflection and they're spending a lot longer kind of explaining to you what they saw or what they encountered and the challenges that they faced. That would be maybe a longer Flipgrid. So I guess I don't really know, although I will say usually 2 minutes is what the students are doing. Even when I have a really big discussion, like the example I gave you with the bariatric surgery, they talk fast enough that it's very rare that it's over 2 minutes.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Can I interject something, an observation about that? Setting the time limits, beautiful idea, but also make sure you put in an assignment due date, or at least an expectation of a due date to sort of mesh with your own ability to provide that feedback. Don't say you want it on Sunday and then Monday's a new week, and now you're having to cram that assessment or just observing into such a short time frame. You'll make yourself crazy.
And I usually, the first week when I do a Flipgrid and they're just basically doing like an introduction of themselves, getting used to using Flipgrid the first time, I'll do a brief response back to them that very first week. But I do tell them, and this is in the syllabus, that I watch them every week, but I'm not going to respond to every single person every single week. I'll randomly pick somebody each week to respond back to, but mostly I'm just listening at content every week. And then I'll just pick somebody to respond to, because you couldn't possibly every single week respond to 75 people. That's a lot of time to respond to. Now you can, on Flipgrid, you can type in responses too. And so like the student that I had that had the bad stutter, she typed in her responses to her peers when she sent me her YouTube videos. So that's an option too, as well, especially if you have somebody that might need additional accommodations that could type in a response. But that could be their expectation is I'm going to watch it all, but I may not respond to every single thing.
Yeah, I currently do not respond to all of them. I do similar to what you said. I read them all and then I make a video at the end and I like shout out to people. You know, so-and-so's was good, go watch it. But yeah, no, I agree. There's no way you could respond to all of them.
Would Flipgrid also be good? You know how the very first day of class, usually have all the students go and introduce themselves, and I'm from so-and-so, and my major is this and that, and my career aspirations are this. It would be a good way to, not to say skip that, but it could be done through the software, correct?
Yes, and I do that if I go intro video, this is me, and they tell us the best thing you've ever eaten, or you know, one time, yeah, like this one, name a title of a song that talks or mentions food in the lyrics. Like you can do fun things like that, and that way another student can say, oh my gosh, that's my favorite song too. Or, you know, it helps the students when they're making comments to peers have something to sort of engage with the other people in their class. So
just a really quick side note. Adobe Spark is now Adobe Creative Cloud Express. They changed it. So if you go looking for Adobe Spark and it doesn't pop up, it's now Adobe Creative Cloud Express is what it's called now, but it's pretty much the exact same thing. Currently, I know our students have access to it, but I think it is something that we pay for. I don't expect that to change, but it did become odd because Spark used to be free for everyone to use, but now it's kind of a slightly paid service type thing.
questions on any of these other ones?
Karina, do you use these just for fully online classes or for all your classes, whether they're face-to-face or not, and you still do these types of things, or is it more just your fully online classes?
Both. I use Flipgrid for my in-person and online intro to nutrition class. I do it both. I've done it in a senior level aging class that I taught because they were seniors and I wanted them to discuss some really controversial things related to older people. And I had tried to do those discussions in class, and I don't get a great response because people are always hesitant, but they are more open in an online format like this. And so I have done some more sort of controversial topics on Flipgrid, and I don't always do them every week. I might do 3 or 4 throughout the semester for the in-person class. I do use Canva and PictoChart in both in-person and online because we do a lot of education in our degree. So being able to provide concise education that's at the right age level and reading level is a skill that they have to be able to have and be able to communicate nutrition information to people who have low literacy. So we use those things quite a bit. I use the Google site right now only for my in-person class, actually. I don't use it for my online classes. And then Adobe Spark, which I can't seem to get the new name, I'm sorry, the Creative Cloud. I have right now only used that one for the 100% online. So it really depends on what I want the student to do in the class, which one I think would be best for them. And if I want that activity to be seen by a lot of other people or interacted with a lot of other people, which one I will use.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. So you touched on this briefly, but where's the sweet spot for you in terms of the foundational knowledge students need to make these experiential types of assignments worth their time versus do you track me, like, they have to have some foundational knowledge, but are there cases where you would build an assignment where they may have relatively little versus where they have a lot of foundational knowledge with the expectation be higher, deeper? Can you just describe your thought process behind that?
Yes. So, like in dietetics, for example, in nutrition, as I mentioned, we do a lot of education. So like in the 200 level intro to nutrition class, when they make that handout for the food bank, I'm really asking for really basic, the most simple skill level. Like, you know, a lot of times they're freshmen, sometimes they're sophomores, but I just need them to be able to take the content in the book and put it in their own words. That's the most basic skill that they have to do for that one. But when they get to me their senior year as a food and nutrition major and they're creating a handout, they need to be beyond, can they take that and put it in their own words? Then they have the added challenge of making it age appropriate, making it reading level appropriate, and making sure that they are making it sort of visually, the psychological aspect of a handout, making sure it's visually appealing, that the information all is concise, evidence-based. So yes, like I might use the same software, but for that audience, I'm asking for things on a different level based on what I think their skills should be. What should they have built up to once they get to that assignment? Does that answer your question?
It sure does. I'm also looking for a sweet, like, there's no limits once the foundational knowledge is high. But to your point, like I am going to be teaching mainly master's degree students. So my thought is that, you know, but there's still procedure or foundational knowledge that they'll need. It seems like we got to get over that hump. And I'm just trying to get your perspective about that. So that was great.
Yeah. And I usually, because I use Tilt to like design all of my assignments, I usually tell the students up front, like, you have to have at the minimum, you have to know evidence-based information. You can't Google it to find out information for your handout, right? Like you have to have that as a minimum if you're a senior level, versus at freshman level, I might be saying you have to be able to read critically and you have to be able to write. Like that might be what I want for maybe a freshman, is being able to read and write really well, to put something in their own words that makes sense. So yeah, it's important that you really, and that gets to, as you're planning it, what skills do you really want them to have? What knowledge do they need to have to even just complete the activity?
Perfect.
Anything else real quick before our time's up? I want to respect everybody's time.
Dr. Christopher, thank you so much today. She's always been really super available and open to questions. Please forward them through me, or I'm sure she'd be happy to contact you directly. If we can help you in the Instructional Design Center with any of these implementation questions, please get in touch with me or another instructional designer. More than happy to help you. And I really appreciate the participation and the attendance today. And thank you, Dr. Christopher.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. Bye.